I screamed inside my chest the moment Daniel said, "We could balance this," because deep down I knew he meant I should always carry more than him. I wanted love to feel like an open horizon, yet instead, it became a tilted scale pressing me into the ground. Sarah laughed when she first joined us, her laughter bright as glass shattering, and Daniel swore no one would ever tip the weight against me. I believed him foolishly, because love felt like a dangerous promise dressed as freedom. Emily warned me, rules are meant to hold but hearts rarely obey, yet I thought structure would save me. Michael stayed quiet, watching with eyes that said everything I couldn't admit, silence heavier than words. Daniel kissed me after Sarah left that night and whispered, "See, we're in control." But my chest felt hollow, like he kissed away my dignity. I wanted balance, but instead felt like a shadow clinging to edges of their joy. The bed became an arena where every touch was measured, every breath a question of worth. By the time the night ended, I already knew I had stepped into a storm with no shelter waiting at the end. The next morning, Daniel said, "See, balance is possible if we trust." His words sounded like chains dressed as comfort. I smiled though my stomach knotted. Sarah's perfume still lingered in the sheets. I thought of Emily's warnings and Michael's silence. The world outside glowed with morning light, yet inside me it felt like night. Every movement at breakfast carried invisible weight. Sarah texted Daniel, and he smiled in a way he no longer smiled at me. My coffee tasted bitter, though sugar drowned inside. I wanted to scream, but instead said, "I understand." Sarah entered our home again with laughter, and Daniel's eyes lit brighter than any lamp in the room. I stood near the window, pretending to read, though my ears burned with every word they shared. Emily called later asking, "Are you safe in this?" I lied and said, "Yes." Michael stayed wordless, watching the cracks grow wider while holding his secrets. My chest screamed, yet my lips betrayed me with silence. I wanted to matter more than a visitor, but I was already fading into background shadows. Night fell heavy when Daniel whispered, "She makes things lighter," and I wondered if I was the weight. My chest cracked as I smiled like I agreed. Michael sat in silence across the table, his stare piercing me more than Daniel's words. Emily texted again saying, "Remember rules, don't save hearts." I typed back but deleted every letter. My reflection in the window looked like a ghost haunting its own life. I wanted to speak, but my throat locked in iron. Silence swallowed me whole, leaving only the echo of Sarah's laughter still trapped in walls. By the week's end, Daniel repeated, "We are stronger together." His voice broke into echoes of lies. Sarah brushed his arm casually, unaware of knives her touch carved into me. Emily visited that night, her voice soft but cutting. "You're breaking under this." Michael finally spoke after days of silence, his tone deep. "You cannot carry all of this alone." My lips trembled, but I said, "I'll be fine." I knew I wasn't. The storm had only begun, and every confession I buried felt like a fuse burning toward an inevitable explosion. Daniel said, "Trust me, no one is being favored," yet the way his phone lit up with Sarah's name burned through me. I laughed lightly, pretending it meant nothing. Emily told me, "You're excusing wounds as lessons." My chest tightened. Sarah arrived with wine, her smile bold, and Daniel welcomed her as though the house belonged more to her than me. Michael stayed silent again, but his stare pierced me sharper than knives. I felt like a guest in my own home. The rules we made were supposed to protect me, yet every boundary Daniel swore to honor crumbled under his hunger. Sarah whispered jokes in Daniel's ear and he leaned closer, forgetting I was in the room. I smiled anyway. That night, Daniel turned to me in bed and said, "We're building something stronger." I wanted to scream that strength doesn't come from breaking promises. Instead I said, "I know," even though my throat burned. Morning light fell across the kitchen table as Daniel said, "Balance means compromise." His eyes avoided mine. Sarah's lipstick stain was still on his glass. Emily messaged me, "You are not imagining this." I deleted her words before replying. Michael finally asked, "Why are you silent?" his tone soft but firm. I froze, spoon clinking against my cup. My silence was not strength, it was surrender. Daniel whistled casually as if nothing was breaking. Sarah's laugh echoed in my head. I swallowed my fear like bitter medicine, convincing myself control was still possible. The truth was already bleeding from every corner. My hands trembled, but I said, "I'll be fine." The lie tasted heavier than the coffee in my mouth. Sarah leaned against Daniel on the sofa, whispering softly while his laughter filled the room. I stood near the window, pretending the view mattered more. My heart felt like glass cracking beneath footsteps. Emily called, voice sharp, "He is choosing." I lied, "He loves us both the same." She said nothing, the silence heavier than words. Michael sat nearby, arms folded, his stare unmoving. He didn't need to speak. His silence screamed the truth louder than any confession. Daniel reached for Sarah's hand and said, "No one is being left behind." I nearly laughed. My reflection in the glass showed a ghost of myself, pale and hollow, watching love slip further out of reach. Daniel said, "Sarah just makes me feel lighter," and the words pierced deeper than any betrayal. I smiled faintly, my face an obedient mask. Emily's voice echoed in memory, "Rules can't save what's already crumbling." My chest caved inward. Michael finally spoke. "You're bleeding silently," his voice firm but compassionate. I wanted to collapse in his arms, yet I stayed frozen. Daniel poured wine for Sarah, ignoring the storm in my eyes. Sarah raised her glass as though celebrating victory. Every promise felt like dust between my hands. The rules became ashes, the balance a cruel lie. I whispered to myself, "I will survive," though survival felt like drowning. By week's end, Daniel said, "We're stronger because we share." His words echoed hollow. Sarah brushed his arm casually, her touch louder than any scream. Emily visited, her eyes sharp, saying, "You are breaking." I smiled weakly, unable to deny it. Michael stood near the doorway, arms crossed, voice heavy, "You cannot keep pretending." The room fell silent, every word like glass underfoot. Daniel smiled, as if nothing was fractured. Sarah tilted her head, amused at my restraint. Inside, my soul screamed louder than my voice ever could. Yet I only whispered, "I'll manage," though I knew I was already lost in the storm. Daniel said, "You always imagine the worst," yet his phone buzzed again with Sarah's name. I pretended not to see, my chest burning. Emily told me, "Jealousy is a symptom, not the disease." Her words cut deeper than she knew. Sarah arrived glowing, her perfume announcing her before her voice did. Daniel's smile widened in ways it never did for me. Michael sat nearby, quiet, but his silence screamed accusation. I felt like air in the room, invisible, yet suffocating. Every boundary we made slipped through Daniel's hands like sand. Sarah leaned close, brushing his shoulder. My body stiffened, but my lips stayed still. I whispered to myself, "Hold on," though I felt like I was already gone. The night carried weight heavier than silence. Daniel whispered to Sarah, "You understand me better," his words twisting inside me like knives. I smiled faintly, my face a mask. Michael's stare was sharper than fire. Emily called again, asking, "How much will you sacrifice?" I lied and said, "I'm fine." My voice cracked, betraying me. Daniel poured another glass of wine, Sarah's laughter rising like bells. My ears burned. I whispered to myself, "I am enough," though every gesture between them told me otherwise. The bed that night felt like a battlefield where my presence was already defeated. Sarah's voice filled the kitchen, soft and teasing. Daniel leaned in, eyes glowing. I stood at the counter, holding a glass too tightly. Michael walked in quietly, gaze steady on me, not them. His silence was louder than Sarah's laugh. Emily texted again, "Stop confusing destruction with freedom." I wanted to scream, yes, but my fingers typed nothing. Daniel said, "We're stronger with her." His smile felt cruel, even if he didn't know it. I pressed my nails into my palm, whispering, "I'm not vanishing." Yet the truth was already written across their faces. Daniel said, "Stop looking for cracks where there aren't any." My heart twisted because the cracks were all I could see. Sarah's perfume clung to his shirt. Emily told me on the phone, "Your silence is killing you." Michael leaned close that night, whispering softly, "You deserve more than this." I almost broke, almost confessed my despair. Daniel walked in laughing with Sarah, their joy louder than my pain. I felt like a ghost haunting their happiness. My reflection in the window looked more like absence than presence. I whispered to myself, "Don't shatter," though I already was. By week's end, Daniel said, "This is the balance we dreamed of," and I wanted to laugh at the cruelty. Sarah's head rested on his shoulder, her eyes closed with comfort. I sat nearby, my chest collapsing inward. Emily visited, eyes sharp, saying, "You're disappearing piece by piece." Her words burned. Michael finally said, "You can't keep drowning quietly." His voice carried the weight I had buried. Daniel kissed Sarah's forehead as if sealing a vow. I whispered to myself, "I will not vanish." But the truth was already carving me hollow. Daniel said, "You're overreacting again." But Sarah's sweater hanging on the chair screamed louder than him. My chest froze as I whispered, "She forgot it here," though deep down I knew it was placed like a flag. Daniel smirked faintly, not denying. Michael sat stiff, eyes burning with quiet fury, his silence sharper than knives. Emily entered moments later, her voice slicing through the tension. "Truth doesn't vanish just because you refuse to see it." I wanted to scream, but my voice drowned inside me. Sarah arrived soon after, her perfume drifting through the air like smoke, her confident smirk daring me to react. Daniel reached for her hand openly, laughter spilling carelessly. My body turned to stone. I forced a faint smile, pretending it was nothing. Yet inside I was a ghost, watching the walls of my life collapse around me, while Sarah wore victory like perfume. That night Daniel whispered, "I love you," but his eyes shifted toward Sarah's sweater still on the chair, not me. My chest sank like lead. I lay stiff in bed, pretending his words belonged to me, but I knew better. In the morning Michael spoke softly but firmly. "You already know the truth." His tone left no room for denial. Emily's message glowed on my phone, words sharp. "Rules cannot protect a heart that's already bleeding." My hands trembled as I deleted it. Later, Daniel brushed Sarah's arm in front of me, careless, casual, as if our rules had never existed. Sarah laughed with a sound like glass shattering, beautiful but cruel. My lips betrayed me with the lie, "I'll be fine," though inside I was already gone. The bed that night felt more like a coffin where promises lay buried. And my love felt like a shadow erased from its own story. Daniel leaned across the table, his voice slicing. "Sarah understands me in ways no one else does." My chest caved inward, shattering into silence. Sarah's fingers rested on his hand, lingering too long, her smile quiet but triumphant. I forced my lips into a smile though they trembled, the mask cracking. Emily stood near the wall, her voice sharp. "He's breaking every promise he made to you." My stomach twisted, she was right. Michael's voice finally broke his silence, steady and sharp. "Stop confusing silence with strength." His words pierced deeper than Daniel's betrayal. My throat locked, but inside my skull a scream clawed for release. I whispered to myself, "I'm vanishing," though I was still sitting at the same table. The illusion of balance dissolved into dust. Betrayal no longer hid in shadows. It glowed in daylight across Sarah's smile, and Daniel wore it with pride. Daniel stumbled home, late, shirt wrinkled, eyes glazed, perfume clinging that wasn't mine. "We just talked," he muttered. But when his keys dropped, Sarah's earrings rolled across the floor, glinting like tiny daggers. My chest hollowed, breath stolen. Michael's jaw clenched, his silence sharp, fury burning in his stillness. Emily's voice crackled on my phone, words cutting through the silence. "He's crossed every line you built." Daniel's smirk spread across his face, charm wrapped like a shield, as if a smile could erase betrayal. A few minutes later, Sarah walked in boldly, unapologetic, brushing past me as if I were air. My body froze in place, the words welcome slipping out of my mouth like poison. The betrayal was no longer hidden behind whispers and shadows. It was celebrated openly, a theater of cruelty performed in my own home. By the week's end, Daniel declared, "This is love, just bigger." His words hollowed my chest. Sarah leaned against him with a smile sharp as glass, her eyes burning with quiet triumph. I sat trembling, body screaming silently for air. Emily's voice cracked as she said, "You're disappearing in front of yourself." The words pierced me, and my body stiffened. Michael rose suddenly, his voice thunderous, "Enough!" His anger echoed across walls once filled with laughter. Daniel brushed Sarah's arm, calm, unbothered, his smirk crueler than silence. My lips parted, whispering faintly, "I'll survive," though survival felt like being buried alive. The truth pressed on me, undeniable. Sarah's presence wasn't the twist. The real betrayal was the realization that Daniel had erased me long before Sarah walked in. The collapse wasn't sudden, it was complete. Daniel shouted, "You twist everything!" His voice cracked with anger, but his guilt bled through. Sarah clung to his arm, eyes fierce. My chest exploded with words I had buried for too long. "You already chose her," I screamed. Emily stood between us, voice sharp. "This isn't love, it's war." Michael slammed his fist against the table, saying, "Stop destroying her." My body shook, tears burning, my voice trembling as I said, "I was never enough for you." Daniel's silence confirmed what his words never could. Sarah's smile turned cruel, as if victory was already hers. The room burned with everything unsaid, too heavy to escape. Daniel whispered, "I wanted more," his voice trembling. My body froze as Sarah said, "You always belonged to me." I laughed bitterly, broken. "You promised balance, but you only gave me emptiness." Emily's eyes glistened with rage. Michael said, "You destroyed her trust," his voice raw, shaking. Daniel covered his face, muttering, "I never meant to hurt you," yet his hand still lingered near Sarah's. My chest collapsed under the weight of final betrayal. I screamed, "Stop lying!" My voice cracked like glass breaking. Silence followed, sharp and deadly, as though the room itself had stopped breathing. Daniel said, "I love you both," but the lie dripped heavy in his tone. Sarah smirked, replying, "You love me more." My chest shattered, words exploding. "You turned me into an option, not a choice." Emily whispered, "This is cruelty, not freedom." Her eyes locked on me, voice trembling with compassion. Michael roared. He broke every rule, his fury vibrating the walls. I felt my body tremble, collapse closer, screaming through tears, "I can't carry this anymore." Daniel froze, Sarah's smirk faltering. The truth filled the room. Undeniable, unbearable. Daniel collapsed onto the couch, whispering, "I can't lose either of you." My rage boiled over. "You already lost me." Sarah turned away briefly, mask cracking. Michael said, "You played with fire and burned everything." His voice echoed like thunder. Emily knelt beside me, whispering, "You're stronger than this pain." My body shook violently, sobs rising uncontrollably. Daniel reached for me, but I recoiled, screaming, "Don't touch me!" The silence that followed was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. The truth was final. Nothing could return us to what we were. Daniel shouted, "Don't walk away." His voice cracked, but I had already broken. Sarah's face twisted with fear of losing her prize. Emily whispered, "Let her go," her voice trembling. Michael said firmly, "She's done." I whispered, "You promised balance, but you tipped me out of the equation." My tears fell like rivers, my voice raw with finality. Daniel's silence was louder than thunder. Sarah's smirk dissolved into nothing. The climax ended not with choice, but with collapse. The storm consumed everything we once built, leaving only ruins behind. The morning after, silence filled the house heavier than screams. Daniel sat with his head in his hands, whispering nothing. Sarah leaned against the wall, arms crossed, eyes guarded. I walked past them, empty, whispering, "It's over." Emily said softly, "You don't have to explain," her eyes gentle. Michael placed his hand on my shoulder, steady, silent support. The world looked the same, but nothing inside me was untouched. I felt carved out, a ghost of myself. Daniel looked up, lips trembling, but words refused to come. Sarah sighed, already weary of the war she thought she won. I walked away, leaving pieces of myself scattered behind. Daniel whispered, "Please don't leave," but his voice was paper thin. I turned my face away, my silence louder than his plea. Sarah looked frustrated, tapping her fingers as though patience was gone. Emily's eyes narrowed, fury hidden under calm. Michael said firmly, "She doesn't owe you anything anymore." I wanted to collapse into the floor, but I stood upright, body trembling. I whispered, "I can't survive inside this lie." Daniel's face broke, but I didn't flinch. The balance was ash. I packed slowly, every fold of fabric a funeral. Daniel stood frozen in the doorway, whispering, "Don't." Sarah looked away, uninterested now that victory meant emptiness. Emily helped me fold clothes, silent tears sliding down her cheek. Michael carried my bag, his silent, steady strength. I whispered, "This was supposed to be love," but the words felt like ashes. Daniel reached out, fingers shaking, but I pulled away. "You chose this," I said, my voice steady for the first time. Daniel shouted, "You'll regret this," but his voice cracked with desperation, not strength. Sarah crossed her arms, her smirk gone. Emily stepped closer, saying, "She's reclaiming herself." Michael whispered, "You're not broken, you're surviving." I walked through the doorway, my chest heavy but my steps steady. Daniel collapsed onto the couch, his sobs muffled by hands. Sarah turned away, silent now. The storm had ended, leaving rubble where we once called home. I stood outside, air sharp and clean, the silence after the storm. Michael whispered, "You're free now." Emily hugged me tight, her tears wet against my cheek. I whispered, "Freedom feels like loss," and my voice broke. Daniel's figure stood framed in the window, face pale, watching me vanish. Sarah turned away from him, their victory hollow. The house behind me was no longer mine. I walked forward, not whole, but still moving. The ashes of love fell behind me, silent and final. The first night alone, silence screamed louder than any fight. I lay in a borrowed bed, whispering to myself, "This is freedom," though it tasted like loss. Michael's voice echoed in memory, "You're not broken." Emily's words rang softer, "Pain does not mean weakness." I wanted to believe her, but the hollow ache devoured me. Daniel's shadow haunted the room, his laugh, his lies, his touch replaying like broken glass in my mind. Sarah's smile lingered too, not victory anymore, just poison. I whispered, "I loved too much, and that was my crime." The confession hung in the air like smoke. Daniel called, his voice cracked, "Please come back." I listened in silence before pressing end. Sarah's laugh, faint in the background, pierced like knives. My tears fell, but I whispered, "No more." Emily hugged me hours later, saying, "You did what he never could. You chose yourself." Michael nodded quietly, his eyes steady, his silence strong. For the first time, I felt a small fragment of control. The storm was gone, but the ruins still bled. I whispered, "Love should not destroy," though it already had. Days passed, each one slower than the last. Daniel sent messages, "I can fix this," but the words felt empty. Sarah remained beside him, a crown of betrayal. My chest burned reading his apologies. Emily said, "Stop reading his words," as she pulled the phone away. Michael whispered, "He will never change," and I believed him for the first time. I stared at my reflection, whispering, "I am still here." It wasn't victory, but it was survival. I returned to the house once, empty boxes waiting. Daniel sat slouched, Sarah gone. His eyes hollow, his voice breaking. "I lost you." I said nothing, only lifted my things quietly. Emily stood beside me, firm as stone. Michael carried the weight without words. My hands shook as I touched the walls one last time. The echoes of love and lies clung like dust. I whispered softly, "Goodbye," leaving the ghosts to him. On the final night, I whispered, "He told me we could balance, yet I was always the one tipped out of the equation." My voice cracked, but it was truth at last. Emily held my hand. Michael stood close. Daniel's face remained only in memory, Sarah's laugh echoing faintly in nightmares. But I was no longer trapped inside their storm. The last confession burned my throat, but freed my chest. I walked forward, broken yet alive, leaving behind the wreckage of a love that was never equal.